Thank you to Mayor Driscoll for that excellent speech. Now, moving on to our second opposition speaker is Ioannis Skordis. Ioannis is a first-year history and politics student from Fitzwilliam. You have the ears of the House.
Members of the Cambridge Union, I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude in being given the opportunity to speak and look forward to sharing my thoughts on you on this issue, or lack thereof. The proposition has made some great points that I'd like to expand upon, but they've used various terminology. I, instead, will phrase them as the evolution and progression of the Labour Party and the embracing of economic responsibility. This is much better suited to serving the working class than some radicalism. Today's Labour hasn't betrayed anyone. The claim we find ourselves up against today is tantamount to suggesting that every Labour government in the last 30 years has hurt the average worker. A myth which couldn't be further from the truth. I'll show this through two major points. A, that an electable centrist Labour can incite far more change than a radical opposition party. And B, that even if a radical Corbynite Labour were in power, they would be of much greater threat to the working class. My first point is proven through the manifestation of New Labour under Tony Blair. The party was modernised, Clause 4 rightfully scrapped from its constitution, embracing market economics. A third way was envisioned, which meant Labour could finally win again. So much could now be achieved for lower income groups which had been neglected under recent neoliberalism. Policies like the Sure Start programme, acknowledged by my friend here, focus on accessible education and family support, especially resourceful for those in disadvantaged areas. Fundamentally, Blair emphasised each individual's employment right. Mayor Driscoll talks about continuity Thatcherism, but he introduced the national minimum wage in 1999. He signed the European Social Chapter, which both Thatcher and John Major opted out of. Continuity Thatcherism? The EU Working Time Directive was implemented, limiting the working week to 48 hours and granting paid holiday. Maternity leave was extended. In a bit, I'll make some progress first. Maternity leave was extended and paternity leave allowed for the very first time. Even unions were recognised and promoted through the 1999 Employment Relations Act. These would have been but mere fantasies had Labour stuck to a radical, rigid, obsolete ideology. The Tories would have remained solely in power and no progress whatsoever would have been made on the advancement of working rights. And that is the harsh truth. Today, the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn from the party signals a watershed moment for Labour. It seems that Labour can finally win again. Many times the Conservative Party warned the British people about him, and they listened. In 2019, under a far-left so-called Workers' Manifesto, 42% of working-class voters, 42% of Labour's base and backbone voted Conservative, while only 33% voted for Jeremy Corbyn, as Labour suffered their greatest defeat in 84 years. Conversely, Labour is now soaring in polls. A win would see the prioritisation of our NHS, of our education system, putting police back on the streets. This is supplemented by a desire to keep British manufacturing alive. Continuity Thatcherism, get Britain building. Traditional Labour values. This includes upskilling the domestic workforce and thereby combating structural long-term unemployment. A forecast £3 billion will be invested into the steel industry in the next 10 years alone, helping communities like Sheffield and cities which are so reliant on it, creating and preserving jobs in the manufacturing sector. The Take Back Control Act promise would also leave the futures of previously left-behind communities in their own hands. Most importantly, today's Labour would help protect workers' rights. Keir Starmer is intent on restoring a genuine living wage, attacking the gig economy pioneered by 14 years of Tory government through a ban on zero-hour contracts, and ending the injustices of fire and rehire, continuity Thatcherism. Once again, trade unionism is back on the agenda as he pledges to tear up anti-trade union laws and defend the right to strike. I'm not sure that this is trickle-down economics. Does any of what I just said sound like betraying the working class? I can't see any reason why Labour shouldn't be praised for their sensibility and pragmatism, rather than being berated for refusing the worship of false prophets and their apocalyptic prophecies. Yes?
Is it pragmatic to not commit to lifting the two-child benefit cap, which is the single biggest driver of child poverty in this country? Is that pragmatism?
I'll get to that in my next point. That's exactly what I'm talking about in my next point. That even if radicalism was electable, it would still be much less beneficial for the working class. And this is in light of the COVID recession, the worst economic crisis since the 1930s. Things are bleak now, but there's a reason they're so bleak. And that's because of the COVID crisis. Yeah. I'm getting to it. Turning on the spending taps can be on no one's agenda. In the words of Keir Starmer, no. In the words of Keir Starmer, growth is stagnant and public services are on their knees. Taxes are higher than at any time since the war. We will be ruthless when it comes to spending every pound wisely. Unfortunately for those opposite, there's a stark difference between economic competence and, as Tony Blair would call it, marooning on Fantasy Island. Reckless spending won't help the working class. It will be the final blow to a victim already in intensive care. Government debt reached 97.8% of GDP in October, and the next year it's forecast to reaching 98.6%. Reverting to Jeremy Corbyn's ideas for renationalisation of, and I apologise in advance for the long list, rail, energy, water, the Royal Mail and broadband infrastructure would cause unprecedented havoc. We simply don't have the means, nor justification to go that far. So it's been replaced by far more effective re-regulation. After these points, I'd like to reaffirm that being economically responsible doesn't mean that Starmer has suddenly metamorphosed into the likes of Hayek or Friedman. Like I've already shown, the working class are being duly represented in a more efficient manner. Today's circumstances mean that Labour must win. If Labour lose now, when Conservatives are at their weakest point, especially because of internal divisions, the consequences would be catastrophic. And the group affected most of all would be the working class. So is it the case, as Team Proposition is so desperate to argue, that a losing party is preferable to a winning one for the working class? That radical socialism is preferable to sensible pragmatism? Who are you voting for? The answer is a resounding no, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what's being proven in the polls today. So I'd like to finish with a Machiavellian ideal that says that one must consider the final result before judging the process by which it's obtained. The evolution of the Labour Party should not be confused or conflated with a rash impulse that the working class are being left behind. Thank you.